Welcome to the Construction Collective, a podcast by ISG. This series is a platform for meaningful conversations that are shaping the future of the construction industry. Bringing together voices from across the built environment, we engage with influential people who are redefining how our cities and infrastructure are built. Our ambition is to move beyond surface-level discussions, exploring the challenges and opportunities transforming construction today. Join us as we explore the ideas shaping what comes next in our industry. In this episode, we focus on the construction and delivery of large-scale projects in the UAE, from industrial and logistics facilities to manufacturing hubs and complex commercial developments. With major infrastructure investment, government-led diversification strategies, and increasing private sector participation, the UAE continues to position itself as a global hub for manufacturing, logistics, advanced production, and mixed-use developments. Warehouse and logistics projects serve as a strong example of how scale, speed, and technical performance are reshaping construction delivery. Today, we're going to extend this conversation more broadly. And I'm delighted to welcome Keenan Grote, COO of PMK Consult, Rob Letts, Business Development Director of ISG Middle East. Welcome, gents.
Thanks, Ross.
So we're going to go straight into now just around speed to market versus quality, around some of the execution challenges as well. First question to Keenan. How do you balance aggressive timelines with quality and compliance?
It's a very good question. Ultimately, I don't think one needs to be excluded in pursuit of the other. A lot of this comes from how projects are set up. Understanding what the key drivers for those projects operationally, what your budget parameters may be, programming, so on and so forth, and ultimately what the stakeholders' directives may be. But in every instance, it will begin and end with how those projects are set up. Understanding the design parameters, how best to design for the ultimate objectives. It's imperative that those guardrails are set at the very beginning, because ultimately those are the guardrails that will determine the success ratios of the project. You can establish the qualitative requirements from the very beginning, and those qualitative requirements should not necessarily need to be a sacrifice on program, as long as they're built into the project strategy from the beginning.
Perfect. And then what do you see that typically causes program slippage on these large-scale developments?
Again, great question with a myriad of different answers. Kind of sticking with the original point that I made, if you aren't setting up projects from the beginning, based on, again, the key parameters that you're looking to achieve through the delivery model, you will naturally have knock-on effects on your program. Whether that becomes part of change management, which always has an implication on your programming, whether it has an implication on the coordination of the design elements and how they need to be procured, that can also have a knock-on effect on your programming. Interestingly enough, I think, as we all know, under the current situation that we have here in the GCC, we have an added layer of complexity with regard to the logistics concerns, which has a direct effect on program. There are a lot of projects that we have that have already gone through the procurement stages, and a lot of the materials, heavy materials that are required to be brought in from other regions, are having a direct knock-on effect because of the issues that we have in the GCC at the moment. And you're seeing a direct effect on program. Now, fortunately for us, at least, we haven't had, there's been discussions and early warning notices about force majeure and things like this, but we are kind of working within the confines of the situation and the contractual terms, but we haven't had a direct force majeure clause pulled yet. We're still trying to find additional routes. And as we've seen recently, I think the UAE and Oman have spoken about doing a green corridor to allow a faster ease for some of the logistics and materials to come through. So these are just a couple of the points on programming.
And are you seeing that clients are supporting during this current situation? Are they being particularly supportive and understanding with everything?
Look, I think it's kind of one of those instances where we're all in the same boat, right? We all have the same concerns. You have your sort of personal concerns, your safety, your family, and just the overall well-being of the region, especially for someone like myself and many others. This is a place I've called home for 20 years now. So I think the clients are very similarly understanding and share those same sentiments and concerns. Obviously, there is a continued focus on needing to get the job done to move forward, especially when you're talking about large capital investments through the development that we manage. So I think collectively we're all working as a unit trying to find opportunities for mitigation wherever possible, but with a keen eye on what happens tomorrow and the day after with, I guess, hopeful anticipation.
Yeah, I think there's probably two types of clients. There's clients that we're currently on site with and their appetite to obviously complete what's essentially been confirmed that they want to do. And then there's the prospective people that we've got opportunity for in the pipeline, both sides.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be really interesting over the next, month to 2 months about where their appetite comes from. And I think the sector diversity will really play a part of that. I think you'll get some people wanting to or consider this a really good time to do work. And I think you'll get other people that just want to wait a little bit. Probably isn't a right answer. It'll just be down to a collective company like us or like Keenan's got, or a client that we're using, just to kind of understand what their appetite's going to be like. But I think you will get a mixed bag. There won't be a straight directive of what people want to do. There'll be a mixed bag, and we're currently bidding jobs at the moment along with what Keenan will be doing, and some will go on hold, some will move forward, some we might bid and then they might hold, or there'll just be a different direction, which I think is human. I think it's difficult to then start understanding pipeline and forecasting a little bit better, because I think they will be different. Prior to this, a month ago, everything was full steam ahead, wasn't it? And we couldn't do things quick enough. So I think we'll just see a bit of a change in that.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm just going to go back to now just the delivery of large-scale projects. PMK Consult are known for supporting the delivery of some exceptional large-scale projects within the UAE. From a consultant's perspective, what is the definition of a large-scale project, and how has it evolved in the UAE?
Well, I guess large scale is dependent on, to some extent, sectors. You can have extraordinarily large scale residential projects which are demonstrably different from large scale industrial projects that we've worked on as well. So ultimately, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all definition of what constitutes large scale. For us, we look at it as sort of large capital development. You have, whether it's a developer or an end user, a very large sum of capital investment requirement to develop a project. And as I said, sector specific, it can come in multiple different shapes and sizes. If we were to look at the current work that we're doing right now, large scale, a lot of that is industrial. And similar to the point you were making, I think, some of the impact that we will see, both immediate, short term, and potentially even long term from the current situation is going to be sector specific. I think hospitality, as an example, is going to be one of the more short term effects, where you have a sector that's going to be greatly affected by this. Industrial, on the other hand, I think that there is an opportunity for a continuation, if not even a further expansion of some of the large scale investment opportunity through the industrial sector. For us, managing across multiple sectors has always been one of the advantages with PMK Consult, because we do work across a multitude of specters, whether it's hospitality, healthcare, industrial, commercial, residential, and so on. So one of the things that we are focused on is really trying to work with certain clients that we know are going to have some level of resilience to a situation like we have today. If I were to go back into 2020, one of the last times that we had this kind of uncertainty within not only the region but globally was during COVID. And we saw the exact same thing. There was, at the first instance, a tremendous amount of uncertainty across the board. Clients, consultants, contractors, so on and so forth. But once the dust starts to settle, so to speak, you start to identify very quickly the areas that, the investment will continue, the development will continue, the opportunities will continue. And I think we're going to see that here as well, large scale as well as, other size projects.
Yeah, the development thing's the interesting part, and the size of the developers and how far they are down with their potential scheme they're looking to roll. And I think that you're absolutely right with the sector side. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to sometimes get ahead of the game now, where there were certain problems that they were having when the market was in the position it was a month ago, to maybe now everyone have a different direction. They might want to get rid of land a little, because land was a problem in terms of the warehouse and the distribution, a big problem. As much as everyone thinks that there's loads of land, there isn't. And I think that they were really positioning certain parts of land for certain reasons. But I think this could maybe, loosen that a little bit and maybe drive things forward. So Keenan's probably spot on in the fact that there'll be some sectors, maybe the logistics and warehousing and distribution, manufacturing, that maybe get the go ahead now, as opposed to 4 months ago. There might have been a different strategy.
And then from your perspective now, and from ISG's experience, going back to large scale projects, what do we define that distinguishes a well structured large project from one that struggles?
I think, I suppose we'll sit next to a consultant now, aren't we? Which is, I think from our point of view, the traditional route for us would always be the first point of call in terms of how we believe a job can be structured well. I think everyone's got roles and responsibilities. We all have to adhere to them because we're all a part of what that is. And I think it tends to structure things really well. We were seeing that the design and build market was coming a little bit to fruition, and I think there's advantages for that. But I think some of the schemes that were being put out there on a D&B level were risky from a contractor's point of view. And I think there was speed's obviously the most critical thing, but I think speed is correct, but there's also an element of, risk and not compromising us as builders essentially to take that upon itself. But that was in a market where contractors were definitely coming to the forefront as being of strength compared to what they probably had been years ago. That might have changed now as well with what's going on. But I think from our point of view, traditional procurement route with nominated consultants and specialists in those particular areas, especially doing the complex work, is vitally important.
And you've mentioned speed and how important pre-construction is in appointments and everything. How critical is it that early contractor involvement in protecting project delivery?
I'll go first. I'll let Keenan jump in on this one. I think for us, if an opportunity comes through and there's a level of pre-construction on the job, it says a lot about the job. I think fundamentally for us, pre-construction costs money to the client, but the flaws and advantages of it are absolutely critical, really, from early procurement to design, to the way that the sites are set up, clear strategy, problem solving, really digging into BIM, seeing where the clash, just the whole thing. It just gives you that time that with the actual construction time then reduces because you're essentially ready to go. If we don't have it, doesn't mean the project's not going to be as successful as it is before. But the reality is there's a lot of things ironed out in the pre-construction phase, but there's also a commercial element to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, look, I know it's sort of a used adage, and we've heard it multiple times before, but that doesn't make it any less true. It's the 80-20 pair to, right? So if you look at a total project program from concept, initiation, project briefing, all the way through to sort of handover, the front end 20% is ultimately responsible for the success ratios of the 80% program on the back end. I cannot stress enough how important pre-construction is. The way that you set up a project will ultimately determine its outcome. And this is something that I, repeat time and time again with the entirety of my team. Because if you're not getting the front end planning correct, you will end up with the mistakes that you've made because you haven't done your due diligence at the front end throughout the entirety of the program. Even all the way through to testing and commissioning, you can still see mistakes that were made at the very pre-construction stages. So ideally, it starts with understanding how to set up a project based on the key drivers. And to the point that you're making, not every project needs to be traditional. I think that this market in particular has gotten into this trend of design and build without really understanding the implications and where there is a continuation of risk through a design and build model. So certain projects, and again, dependent on certain requirements within the project, will determine the procurement route that you should be exploring. And then you set up a project accordingly. And how you set those projects up should be dependent on how you intend to procure them. So when you get that done correctly, and then you understand how you're setting the project, why you're setting up the project in that manner, and then once you start executing accordingly, the sooner you can bring in a contractor, at least through the early works or understanding of certain areas or challenges or potential risks within your procurement strategy and methodology, you can start working with the contractors to better understand opportunities. And that, I think, is critical and something that we use quite a bit at PMK. But I think that it's something that is unfortunately overlooked through often what I find to be procurement governance with a lot of developers.
And would you perceive that as probably the biggest risk in terms of project delivery and a successful project delivery?
Which element? In
terms of appointment of contractors late or contractors not getting off on the right foot. What do you perceive as the biggest risks on these large-scale projects?
Well, yeah, again, it really is how the project's set up. So, for example, I don't think, and don't get me wrong, I'm not one to suggest that a design and build route is not an appropriate form of procurement. In many instances, it is. But you have to set it up correctly. Yeah. If your intention is to go through a design and build procurement and to put design parameters and liabilities on a contracting element, then you have to set up the project accordingly, which means you need to have very detailed employers' requirements. You need to understand what the tendering parameters are going to be. You need to pre-qualify the correct types of contractors who can take on that additional service. Many contractors here can build. Not many contractors can design and then build. That's a large learning curve for a lot of contractors. And if you're not setting it up correctly, you are inherently just transferring risk. But that risk ultimately still rests with the client, either the developer or the end user. They still will suffer the consequence of a poorly procured or poorly set up and then poorly procured project.
Yeah. So just moving on to technical complexity at scale and using logistics and industrial facilities as a reference point. Large warehouses are often perceived as pretty simple structures. Where does the real complexity lie?
First and foremost, I think anybody who still considers industrial warehousing as a sort of simple execution or a simple sector, simple construction, it's a bit antiquated. They don't really understand what is now sort of much more currently the ecosystem in which the vast majority of your industrial or warehousing facilities operate. They are very complex, tech-heavy infrastructure projects. And because of that, the complexity that is required within the overall building fabric has increased dramatically. We have moved well past the days of your simple, large racking system with manual storage. Now we're in, a completely different environment where you need to build to allow a flexibility of tech-heavy infrastructure, whether it's going to be your VNAs. So, you need to have a very specific tolerance and specification for everything from your slab to your clear spans and so on and so forth. So that has dramatically increased the requirement that is that is necessary for your building infrastructure to be able to achieve this new environment.
I think the other major part of it as well is, I think historically, just going off what Keenan said, is that, that's how a warehouse or logistics centres, thought of in this day and age in terms of high scale manual racking, flat floors, steel kind of structure and a facade that goes onto it. But if you actually look at some of the large-scale businesses that are actually coming to the region now, they're not having separate offices, separate manufacturing, separate logistics. It's all collectively coming together. They're not having experience centres, they're not having showcases, they're not having showrooms, they're not having any of it separately. It's all coming as one. So you've gone from 90% of JAFSA, for instance, being really solid historical warehousing that's absolutely fit for purpose, but you're also seeing the new kind of like regime of companies bringing opportunity to the country to set up HQs, regional offices. We've been doing a lot of speaking to a lot of the big developers in terms of from the land side recently, and their visions. There's not much space, so where do we go from that? So they're looking at all different types of warehousing in terms of from a construction point of view, stuff that they've never done in the region at the moment. They're going traveling all over the world and seeing different ideas of how they can build logistic hubs, manufacturing. And let's not forget that the government have got a remit within this country to bring as much manufacturing to the region, which will obviously increase the country as a whole. So it's an exciting time. I think there's a lot of different procurement routes that come to. This is from a contractor's point of view. There's a lot of different procurement routes come to mind when building warehouses. There is self-build. There's developers involved. There's the clients themselves involved. So it's not a one fits all really. There's multiple different angles from a client's route to procurement of these, I suppose, more high tech sheds that are being built.
And it's good to get the contractor's point of view and standpoint. What do you see as the most challenging construction elements in some of these large footprint developments?
I think there's, from a large point of view, in terms of scale wise, there is health and safety is huge. You've got to have really strict reporting lines because of the amount of manpower you've got on site spread over such a large area. BIM's huge. I think when it comes to collectively working together, I think the setup of the consultants and the team as a whole, I'm coming at it from my point of view, and I'm pretty sure Keenan will agree that if everyone's on board on a job with an end goal of building that for the client, 9 times out of 10 it'll really go smoothly, and there'll be some really good points. There's going to be mistakes, there's going to be delays, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be everything on the job, because that just comes with a job. But you really notice from day one when the teams come together, because on these large-scale jobs there could be 6-7 different types of consultants on them. If they've got the same mindset and it's driven by the client, I would suggest you create a different environment on site, and it does mitigate a lot of problems. I suppose if you get a bad egg,
because you're solution oriented.
I think if people go into these jobs thinking there's going to be no problems, I think
of course
it's especially the large scale that we're talking about as well. Yeah. I mean, it's just impossible from a procurement point of view, logistics, storage, health and safety, everything that comes with it. So I think it's we don't have to keep going about it. It's all about the team. But the reality is, it's about the professional teams that are on that job working to the same goal.
And then we've mentioned consultants and coordination there, but are we seeing, particularly in the current situation, are we concerned around the stability of the supply chain, the wider supply chain, whether that's supply only or supply and install?
I think so. I think for some of the large ticket items on the jobs, it goes back to the pre-construction. I think there comes a point with pre-construction, if there's early engagement, you can have the design done, have the engineering done, and then with agreement of the team, start to look at the procurement of early ticket items. And that does mitigate a lot of problems that come with it, because if the earlier we can do that from the more, I suppose, critical path procurement, then I suppose you're de-risking things to a certain extent.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, construction, it's one of the biggest global sectors on the planet. And, even though a lot of people talk about how we still use the same basic bunch of materials, and to a large extent we do, there is a lot of adaptation and resiliency within the construction markets globally. When one source of material becomes a challenge, there's a market shift. And it will ultimately come to how you're setting up the projects and what needs to be considered in terms of logistical constraints as you're going through a design stage. It may just be as simple as directly affecting your material selection, your building systems, so on and so forth. I think that there are the two main elements. Once you've already got a project procured and you're in the post-contract stage, you are to a large extent limited by the specified materials and the logistics that are going to be required to be able to facilitate those. There's obviously certain adaptation that can be done post-contract, but it's limited. Pre-contract, you can really kind of forecast. You can look at global markets. You can understand the potential fluctuation. Two of the commodities outside of oil that has the largest fluctuation globally is concrete and steel. And that can have a direct knock-on effect on what you're doing in terms of considering how you're going to design a project based on those parameters to help ensure success ratios. So yeah, I think depending on where you are on a project's life cycle, pre-contract, post-contract, there are different ways to try to mitigate, but ultimately how you're setting some of these up is going to be dependent long-term on how they will continue through the current logistics constraints that we have.
I think over the years now, I've been here 15 now, I think value engineering sometimes is a couple of dirty words that people use, but the reality is it's just jumping on the back of what Keenan's saying, that is the purpose of value engineering when you come to pre-construction phases, identifying problems with materials, lead times, whatever it may be, and as a country in a region, it's as mature now as it's ever been from options and professionals and people working towards the same goal in terms of to deliver certain materials to this site or to the sites. So the options we've got now are as good as they've ever been, really.